as the Industrial Revolution spread and progressed, you start to see people try and deal with the problems of industrial working conditions, long hours, low wages, child labor, dangerous conditions, and overcrowding. So you start to see some reforms, especially as we move into the later part of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. One of the important methods of sort of solving these problems is the formation of unions. A union is sort of like a successor to the medieval guild, in that it's a group of workers from the same job or the same type of jobs. You might see a union of textile workers, a union of steel mill workers, a union of coal miners. The main idea behind a union is the idea of collective bargaining. Let's say we go back to our example of a factory where you've got some workers and you got the owner. Let's say these workers are kind of fed up with their poor wages, their bad working conditions, and they want to change it. So one of them decides to petition his boss for changes. Now, if it's just one guy doing it, the boss probably is going to say no to this, and in fact, he's probably going to fire this guy for being a troublemaker and replace him with someone else. So nothing really changes. The idea of a union is if all of the workers work together, they can collectively, or as a group, bargain or negotiate with their boss. This requires some organization. It often required a lot of, even breaking the law. Unions were illegal at first. Often the boss would hire union busters to break up the unions, often by force. And so it was a process for this to happen, but eventually these unions would form, and the workers would be able to get the changes they wanted made. And so the formation of these unions is an important part in developing some of the reforms that would come later. So as we move later into the 19th century, you saw a number of reform laws, both in Britain and also the United States. Some of those early laws were focused on ending child labor. One thing to keep in mind with child labor is children have always worked, right? If you're a farmer and it's you, your wife, and your 6 kids, then they're the ones that are going to be doing the labor because you don't want to have to hire somebody else. So as people moved from the farms to factories, it was sort of a natural progression to send children to work. But obviously, collecting eggs or milking cows is a lot different from, sticking your hands into industrial machinery trying to repair it, or crawling through a coal mine. So there was this recognition that there needed to be changes to protect children and families. You also saw changes to the work hour and the work week. Often in the early part of the Industrial Revolution, you might work 16 hours a day. By the time we get into the 20th century, this has been negotiated down to 8 hours. And you move the work week from 6 days down to 5 days, much like we have in our modern work cycle. You also see during this time the abolition of slavery across the industrialized world. Now, we talked about the abolition of slavery with the Enlightenment. And those ideas are important because it's the argument of slavery against slavery on moral grounds. But it's also important to recognize that this is also on economic grounds. Part of this is the movement of the economy away from agriculture and into manufacturing and industry. So slave labor was less reliant, or it was less of a thing that relied on by important powers like the British Empire and eventually the United States, especially the northern United States. And also there's this idea that, every job that a slave is doing, that's somebody else not getting paid, a potential worker. So you had the moral grounds argue against slavery, but also the economic grounds become important as we move further into the Industrial Revolution. By 1833, slavery has been abolished in the British Empire. Of course, in the United States, it was not until the end of the Civil War in 1865. The last modern Western state to abolish slavery was Brazil in 1888. So really, as you see industry progress and people deal with some of these problems of the Industrial Revolution, you see the gradual abolition of slavery as well. Women also played an important role in negotiating some of these rights. Women formed their own unions, and of course these unions supported their particular causes, and women generally were paid less. So they're arguing for better pay, but they're also recognizing, a lot of these women workers were also mothers. They're trying to get better pay for, abolish child labor or better conditions for children or public schooling. And so the movement towards women's rights, and we eventually say women's suffrage, are connected to the Industrial Revolution as well.